Family comes first. That's what he said, like it was the last word on the matter. No discussion, no room to breathe. The kitchen smelled like old bacon grease and gasoline. Same torn vinyl chairs. Same dent in the fridge door where Nate once punched it during a tantrum. Ruddy sat at the table in his faded Union jacket, arms crossed, boots muddy, pride louder than his words. "Savannah," he said slowly, "the board's offering you shares, right?" I didn't answer. He already knew. He leaned back, the chair creaking beneath him like it might give out. "You need to sign those over to your brother. Nate's ready for something big. This could be his chance to finally make something of himself, for the family." He meant it. That was the terrifying part. I watched a bead of sweat roll down his temple, disappearing into the gray stubble he hadn't shaved in 3 days. "Look," he added, "you wouldn't be where you are without us, without this house, without me keeping the lights on when your mama died. You owe it to this family, to Nate." My coffee sat untouched. The spoon clinked against the mug when I stirred it, once, twice, before I set it down. I looked at him. He didn't flinch, didn't blink, just waited. I could hear Nate in the garage, probably scrolling through car parts he'd never buy, blasting country music he didn't understand. "You always said family sticks together," Ruddy pressed. "Well, now it's your turn to carry someone. He's your brother." I almost smiled. Almost. They had no idea. They didn't know the 3 a.m. calls I answered for the design team in Germany. Didn't know I'd been working 70-hour weeks since college, skipping birthdays, skipping sleep. Didn't know it was my name buried in the patent filings, because I never told them. They thought I was just a lucky technician, not the woman who redesigned the thermal grid that doubled battery efficiency, not the reason the IPO even happened. And yet, here I was, sitting in the same kitchen I cleaned at 16 with raw hands, being asked to hand it all over to the same boy who never did his own laundry. Not because he earned it, but because he was their son, the real Cline. I picked up the mug, took a sip. It had gone cold. Then I said calmly, "So let me get this straight. You want me to give away equity I earned, because Nate needs to feel like a man." Ruddy exhaled like he'd been patient long enough. "It's not about that. It's about sacrifice, about keeping this family strong." That word again, family. The kind of family where daughters hold the roof up but sons carry the name. Where women inherit chores and men inherit assets. Where silence is loyalty and pain is tradition. I stood up, pushing the chair back gently. Ruddy didn't stop me. He just stared like he'd already won, like this was a minor rebellion I'd come crawling back from. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Just out," I said, but in my head I already knew. This was the last family dinner I'd attend. The last time I'd play dumb, because if they wanted to see what family looked like without me, they were about to find out. I was 15 when the factory took my mother. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't anything dramatic like that, just a faulty valve, a gas leak, an unfortunate systems failure, they said. She'd been working double shifts for weeks, trying to make up for Ruddy's back injury, the one he never fully recovered from because he never fully tried. She didn't make it out. They gave us a check. $11,200, enough to cover the funeral, not enough to fill the hole she left behind. After that, the house changed. Not all at once, but slowly. Like a slow leak under the sink you never notice until the floorboards rot. Ruddy stopped fixing things. He stopped shaving. Started spending his afternoons at the old machine shop with men who wore grief like it was some kind of badge. They'd talk about the good old days, back when men were men and oil meant something. Nate was 12, the golden boy, the last Cline son. He cried once at the service, then went right back to being Nate, throwing rocks at mailboxes, skipping homework, blaming everyone but himself. I washed our clothes, burned my hand learning how to make cornbread like Mom did, paid bills with tips from the diner, skipped prom to unclog a pipe. No one asked me to, but no one stopped me either. At 17, I got a full ride to MIT, mechanical engineering. A counselor cried when I told her. Ruddy didn't even look up from the game when I mentioned it. He said, "That's up north, right? You gonna come back every summer?" I said no. He shrugged. "Well, what's the point then?" So I stayed, turned down the offer, tore the acceptance letter into 4 pieces and threw them in the trash behind the house. Told Ruddy I got waitlisted. He never asked more. I enrolled in the state college instead, lived at home, worked nights, watched Nate crash his car and blame the brakes, watched Ruddy pawn off Mom's wedding ring to pay for equipment that never arrived. Every win I earned was silent. Every bruise I took was buried, because that's what good daughters do. They carry and carry and carry until their backs crack or their hearts close off for good. But here's the thing they never understood. Roots don't scream when they grow. They dig, they hold, they survive, and I'd survived all of them. There's a kind of power in being invisible, not the bitter kind, not the sulking in the corner kind, but the kind that lets you move unnoticed while everyone else talks too loud to listen. That was me, the quiet one, the one who still showed up every Sunday with groceries and cash for Ruddy's electric bill, even when I knew it went straight to his beer fridge. They didn't ask what I did for work. They knew I was some kind of engineer. Thought I fixed air conditioners or maybe helped install solar panels. Didn't care enough to ask more, which suited me just fine. Because while Ruddy nursed nostalgia and Nate rebranded failure as finding himself, I was building something they couldn't see and wouldn't understand even if I showed it to them. I got in on the ground floor of Lumendine. Small lab, 7 people, dusty break room. I didn't care. What they had was potential and questions no one else wanted to solve. Thermal battery storage, energy retention without rare earth metals. We were nobodies trying to change the game, and I was their ghost architect. I coded at night, ran thermal simulations over takeout, took online law classes during lunch breaks just to understand contracts better. I never missed a deadline, never missed a visit home, just handed over 1/3 of my paycheck like it was still 2011. They thought I was generous. I was just paying rent on peace. And all the while, I said nothing. Not when Lumendine got its Series A, not when we filed our first patent. Not even when the Department of Energy showed up asking questions I had answers for. I kept the silence, not out of fear, but out of strategy. Because when you're a woman in a room full of men trying to own your thoughts, quiet becomes your shield, precision becomes your weapon. Ruddy thought I was drifting, Nate thought I was settling. But in the background, I was solving heat loss algorithms that would cut energy waste in half. And every time I went back to that house with its flickering porch light and half-fixed gutters, I'd sit at the same kitchen table and smile like nothing had changed. Because I needed them to believe I was still the girl who folded Nate's laundry, still the substitute mom, still safe, until the day the board called and said, "It's time we offer you equity." And suddenly, silence wasn't just strategy anymore, it was leverage. The kind you don't announce, you wait, and let them walk right into it. The call came on a Tuesday. I was still in my office, fluorescent light buzzing, half-finished code open on one monitor, legal documents on the other. When I answered, Ruddy didn't waste time. He'd heard, I don't know from where. Maybe Nate saw a LinkedIn post. Maybe someone at the bar mentioned it. Didn't matter. He jumped straight in. "No games now, Savannah. You got stock in that company. Real stock. You signing that over to your brother or not?" No hello. No congratulations. Just a demand dressed up as expectation. I didn't answer right away. I watched a tiny crack in my mug, hairline barely visible, spider slowly toward the rim. Something about it felt poetic. Ruddy's voice got tighter. "Don't play stubborn. You know what this family's built on. Sacrifice. Your mama, she gave everything for this house." There it was, her name, used like currency. "If she were alive," he said, "she'd want those shares to help Nate. You think she raised you to hoard power like some Wall Street vulture?" I almost laughed, But there was nothing funny about what he said next. "You're a woman, Savannah. That means something. It means you make space, you give." I let the silence stretch, let it hum between us like a live wire. Then I said, calm as a scalpel, "She did raise me to give, and I did, for 15 years. That's not what I meant. I gave up MIT, gave up internships, gave you a third of every paycheck since I was 22, gave you heat, water, groceries, gave Nate excuses." I took a breath, let the weight of that land. "And now, you want the one thing I built without your hands on it, because suddenly it has value." He scoffed. "We gave you that roof." "No," I said sharply. "I held that roof up." It was the first time I'd ever raised my voice to him. Even a little. On the other end of the line, I heard only breathing. Not heavy, just confused, like he couldn't figure out how the furniture moved when he'd been sitting still. Then his tone shifted. Cold, dismissive. "Well, if you walk away from this, don't come back. Don't expect to be family anymore." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "Good," I said. "Then we finally agree on something." And I hung up. No yelling, no tears, just a final click. That was the last time I spoke to him. No more dinners, no more visits, no more pretending. Because that was the moment I understood. He never saw me as his daughter, only as a resource. And I was done being mined. I left at 2:13 a.m., no bags. Just a laptop, one folder, and the keys to a studio apartment in Austin that still smelled like fresh paint. The house was quiet, Ruddy's snoring down the hall. Nate probably passed out in the garage. They didn't hear the door click shut. Didn't see the lights of my car pulling away. Didn't feel the shift, but it shifted. I didn't leave a note. I left an email. Not sentimental, not angry, just a single PDF attachment. Subject line: Ray, stock ownership and legal boundaries. Inside, a full legal statement of refusal. Drafted by a friend in IP law I'd been quietly consulting for months. It outlined, in plain and binding terms, that my equity was non-transferable without express consent, which I had not and would not give. It referenced NDAs, patent protections, and the clause Ruddy forgot existed when he pushed too hard. I blind copied the company's legal team. By the time the sun came up over the broken porch swing, that email had already passed through 4 corporate servers and been logged in 2 separate legal databases. I was no longer Savannah, the good daughter. I was Savannah Cline, co-inventor of Lumendine's flagship system with enforceable ownership and federal protection. I didn't slam the door, didn't yell, didn't cry. I just erased myself from their story. Effortlessly, in Austin, my apartment was small, 1 window, 1 lamp. Stacks of books on patent law and energy policy lined the walls like insulation. I went back to school, online first. Then night classes. Took exams between strategy calls and product demos. Every time I read a new clause on ownership rights, every time I understood a new layer of what could and couldn't be taken from me. Something settled in my spine. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was weight redistribution. Power shifting from their expectations, back into my own hands, and for the first time since I was 15. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. It came on a Wednesday. I was walking out of class, legal pad under one arm, coffee in the other. The sun was out. Austin buzzed with the usual spring noise, scooters, students, dogs in sweaters. I almost didn't answer, didn't recognize the number. But something in me paused. I picked up. Silence, then a breath, then Nate. "Hey." His voice was different. Flat, stripped of its usual edge. I waited. "I know you don't want to hear from me," he started, "but we're in trouble." I leaned against a concrete pillar. Didn't say anything. He filled the silence like he always did, poorly. We tried to register something under your name, the battery model, for a local grant. Ruddy thought it'd be fine. Just paperwork." I closed my eyes. He kept talking. "But the company found out. Their lawyers got involved. Something about breach of IP and misrepresentation. Dad's land got tied into the mess. Turns out he'd used it as collateral on a side deal. Now he's being threatened with forfeiture. I didn't blink. We need help, Sav. Just one signature, one clarification. Maybe some funds to stop the bleeding. That word again, we, as if I was still part of the unit. As if I hadn't been erased when I stopped serving. I looked down at my notebook. Notes on fair use, ownership chains, penalties for bad faith claims. Then I spoke. Do you know, I said slowly, how many nights I stayed up reworking that algorithm? How many weekends I spent rewriting code so it could function at heat thresholds your brain couldn't even spell? Silence, I kept going. You want to talk about family? I gave 15 years of it. Paid the bills, mopped the floors, fed you both. While you skipped responsibility and Dad skipped reality. I heard his breath hitch. You said I was selfish when I left, I said. But let me ask you something. What exactly did either of you hold up Nate? When the house was breaking, what did you carry? No answer, I nodded to myself. That's what I thought. And I hung up. No rage, no victory speech. Just clean disconnection. Later that night, I got a second call. This one from the company's legal rep. They'd resolved the breach, filed a cease and desist. Ruddy had signed the surrender order, forfeiting any future claims to my name, work, or affiliations. It was over, and I hadn't lifted a single pen. 1 year later, the company went public. Lumendine opened at $62 a share. It closed at $117. I didn't celebrate. No champagne, no dinner. I just sat on the balcony of my apartment, poured myself a cup of black coffee, and watched the sun rise over a city that had never once asked me to shrink. I had a title now. Director of Systems Innovation. I had a legal degree in progress. I had enough in the bank to retire early, but I wasn't going anywhere, because there were girls out there. Quiet ones, sharp ones who held their families together without ever being thanked. And they deserved better than survival. So I stayed. I started a mentorship circle, small, unpaid, off the books. Taught young women in STEM how to hold their own in boardrooms, not just labs, how to read contracts, how to walk away from people who think love means obedience. Some called me an advocate. Some said I was empowering the next generation. But I didn't care about the labels. I wasn't building a movement, just a bridge. One I wish had been there for me. Ruddy never called again. Nate sent an email once, just a subject line. Hope you're happy. I didn't open it, because I was, but not in the way he meant. See, the thing about inheritance is, people think it's land, or money, or last names, but sometimes it's something quieter, something stronger. A pattern broken. A silence ended. A life lived without apology. That was what I claimed. Not a family name, not a dusty house in a town that refused to evolve, but the right to be my own beginning. Now, every morning, I wake up in a place I chose. I drink coffee I bought. I walk into a building that exists because I dared to stay invisible long enough to become undeniable. And when I speak to those students, I don't tell them to fight. I tell them to listen, to themselves, to the part of them that knows the difference between sacrifice and self-erasure. That's the legacy I leave behind. Not just solar cells, not just tech, but light, and I don't need them to understand it. I only need to know. They never got to take it from me.